Some say that accident could have been prevented if only Congress would have acted sooner on better funding for rail safety. Now, that includes one local congressman who's fighting for commuter railroad safety right here in Chicago and, of course, impacting the U.S. as well. Representative Mike Quigley spoke out on the House floor today on a bill he introduced back in March. The congressman from the 5th District here in Illinois joins me from Washington tonight. Congressman, nice to see you as always.
Thank you, Paul. Glad to be on.
So the timing of your bill is interesting because, as I said, you introduced it in March, and yet last week or so we have the terrible, tragic Amtrak derailment, and all I can say is somebody should have been listening to you 2 months earlier.
Well, unfortunately, this isn't a new occurrence. There have been a number of horrible train accidents that have taken place since 1969 that would have been avoided if we had implemented this new technology, positive train control.
And I want to define that. I don't think a lot of people may know what positive train control means. So what does it mean? What is it you're fighting for?
Sure. It's the use of radios, computers, and GPS, and a technology that literally takes over a train if the engineer is going too fast around a turn or blows through a signal. It has it's an extraordinarily complicated system of technology, but it's extraordinarily successful in preventing accidents like the one that took place in Philadelphia.
Is this the kind of system? I know that with previous derailments, after the fact, go in and they upgrade things and install new systems. Is this the system that gets installed always after the fact?
Well, Amtrak, ironically enough, has most of that line in which this accident took place in place. In fact, Amtrak will have positive train control. They'll meet the deadline by the end of this year. They should be fully implementing the program. I'm concerned a little closer to home, Paul. You know, Amtrak only carries about 30 million people a year. Closer to home, Metra, 74 million on a commuter line. Nationally, 500 million rides a year on commuter. Most of them will not meet this deadline. More than half of them are putting off other important rail improvements that involve safety because they're trying to implement positive train control. Metro doesn't look like they'll incorporate this entire plan until 2019.
Yeah, now
it's yet to be seen how Metro plans to fund it.
And let me say that, first of all, you are the only Illinois congressman who serves on the House Appropriations Committee. That's important, but it also means that in this, what was a thud bill is what we call it now, because transportation included with housing these other areas, you're fighting for Illinois. So let me tie together the point you just made with the funding you are seeking, because you are asking for a $40 million investment for core capacity grants, and a lot of that would come home and help the CTA.
Well, look, we were successful the last 2 years getting money for core capacity for the CTA. When we're comparing ridership, the CTA is even more dramatic. The CTA carries more people in a month than Amtrak does in a year. And I like Amtrak. We just have to remember what the bigger picture is here. We need to fund our infrastructure. We need to fund our transportation systems. It's a key part of our economy. China is funding infrastructure 4 times greater than we are. Europe is funding its infrastructure twice as much as we are. It's hurting our economic competitiveness.
And of course, what you also have gotten into that bill, it helps to be on the Appropriations Committee, you are really millions of dollars for certain studies and looking at various impacts, because you've been able to argue Chicago is indeed a transportation hub for the country. You've been able to justify the funding that you are requesting for this area.
Well, that's true. We've had some small success, but I recognize we have to go much bigger. Congressman Lipinski and I have introduced a Rails Act which would fund, almost fully fund, positive train control. Because we're not just concerned about Chicago, we're concerned about the 500 million riders that use commuter rail across the country. Most of them won't meet this deadline. Most of them won't meet it anytime soon, as compared to the 2019 figure for Metra. So we've got to fund our rail system, not just for our health of our citizens and their safety, but also to be competitive on a worldwide basis. If I could go even farther than that, we need to fund our infrastructure so that we can trade competitively. We need to improve the lock system on the Mississippi and the St. Lawrence Seaway so that the farmers in Illinois can export their grain and make the money they need to grow our economy right in this state.
Indeed. I want to shift gears on something else you're asking for in this same bill, but before I do, we talked about Amtrak and the problem. So the Amtrak, the fix, the positive train control, Is that bill footed by Congress, or does Amtrak share in the cost of doing that?
Well, Amtrak shares in the cost of doing everything. Since this was an unfunded mandate passed in 2008, the federal government has only appropriated money twice. I'm sorry, it's only appropriated money once for funding a positive train control, one single year. So basically what the federal government did was say to the freight and passenger rail industry, hey, you've got to implement this extremely important, extremely expensive, extremely complicated system, but we're not going to help you at all. So we need to go back to ground zero, ask ourselves, what are our priorities, and fund this the right way.
I want to focus in briefly on the H part of the THUD bill here, which is housing, always taking care of LGBT people here in Chicago. You've asked for significant funding to increase housing opportunity with people for AIDS, greater access to housing programs for high-risk populations. Speak about that for a moment.
Yeah, it's particularly important. We know that people with HIV/AIDS need housing as much more than anyone. It's very, very important to their health, also for the stability that was involved with taking care of people who are sick. And obviously many who are with HIV/AIDS aren't able to make as much money as they did before. Many of them were homeless, many of them were unemployed. So we've got to provide for those who are least able to take care of themselves.
Well, quick question for our viewers who live out in the O'Hare area that's part of your district. Noise control, big issue. You know, it just impacted aldermanic races. Can you give us an update on there? Because apparently it looks like they're still planning to proceed with runway construction as it was originally planned.
Yeah, I think it's a little tone deaf on the part of the city to start dismantling the diagonal runways. In the reality, the diagonal runways are part of the solution to the inefficiencies at O'Hare and the noise problem. We were able to include language in the same bill you're talking about, the transportation bill, that requires the FAA to work with the Department of Transportation to help resolve some of these noise issues. So last week we were able to get money for the noise study that's so important for soundproofing. This week we were able to get language in the bill requiring the FAA to work with the City of Chicago to solve these problems. But unfortunately it's pushing uphill. The cooperation hasn't been there with the FAA or the Department of Aviation.
Nothing's easy, Congressman, as you well know. I appreciate your time and look forward to touch with you as these issues and others develop in Washington. Thanks so much, Congressman Mike Quigley of Illinois' 5th District. We'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds great. Thank you.